Welcome. Again, we're going to be looking at some creative writing today. This particular piece that you have in front of you, you can see again that it is an illustration. The illustration itself is fairly straightforward, and you can write it in as many ways as you possibly would like. Now, having read this particular piece, you can see that the student has done a number of things well. Now, what are the things that are done well in this particular piece? Well, the narrative definitely possesses good things. The student has managed to create an adequate atmosphere throughout the writing process. The final line of the story, however, has been poorly expressed and negates the story at the end there. For example, if we look at that ending, the student seems to suggest that the buying of a television has brought about some kind of conciliation between the grandfather and the daughter there. Well, in actual fact, that doesn't really work, and that's one of the problems. However, that's not a structural problem. It's actually of telling the story. The story doesn't really fit in that sense. Simply by buying a television seems to have solved all of the problems that the writer has brought out in this particular story. However, the writing itself is not too bad. There are, as you can see, a number of spelling errors in there. There are also a number of awkward sentences. But on the whole, this is not a bad story. Take note of the way that the student has opened up this particular piece, and you will notice that it's reasonably sound. And the story opens up immediately. Rose sat by the door, eagerly awaiting her father. With one arm around her shoulders to keep warm, she cuddled beside their fireplace, scanning the wilderness outside. Amidst the snow was her father, Henry. After hours of grueling labour, he had finally received his monthly wage. Now, it creates a sense of atmosphere there. The language itself is reasonably appropriate all the way through. The student has attempted to build up the atmosphere within each of the body paragraphs. The next paragraph itself is reasonably sound. The third paragraph there, you will notice they trudged all the snow, and you can see that's a rather awkward sentence, but nevertheless, paid is being spelt incorrectly there. It is the wrong paid that the student has used. Then, as I said, with the central part, and this is where the story and where the student has used the illustration here of the television. So with that illustration, you can see that what the student has attempted to do is create this atmosphere to begin with, done that reasonably well. But then the story does fail a little by the fact that, by buying the television has solved the conflict that he has raised within the story. So that's probably one of the faults within this piece, as well as some of the awkward sentence structure. But apart from that, what the student has genuinely managed to do is create that atmosphere that I mentioned earlier. So each of these body paragraphs is logically leading on to the next idea all the way through. And that's one of the key things with writing. Each of the body paragraphs must logically follow on from the next paragraph. So in other words, you have still, even in the creative piece of writing, you should have what we would still term a topic sentence. So in this case, the student has done that. Also has a transition sentence near the end to bring the whole ideas together in a reasonable manner. However, as I said, because of the awkwardness of some of the sentences, because the conclusion doesn't really have a logical element within it, it does lose a number of marks, and that's one of the problems with this particular piece of writing. The vocabulary that is used throughout this is reasonably sound, but again, it's fairly simple, as you can see. Now, there's nothing wrong in that. There's nothing wrong if your vocabulary is not very strong. It is probably better to choose a language that you feel more comfortable with than trying to impress. There's nothing worse than writing that uses language to impress. You should only use language to express the ideas fluently. The student has managed to do that in this particular piece of writing and therefore has been successful along those lines. Sentences have been reasonably well varied. So you've got rather short sentences at times, and then the longer sentences to create that sort of descriptive element that runs through the piece. That's done reasonably well throughout. Dialogue is reasonably good. The student has limited the dialogue, and that's a good thing because dialogue is a very difficult thing to actually write. I may have said on numerous occasions that when you are using dialogue, dialogue is only used to propel the narrative forward. Therefore, it should be to the point and it should be for a genuine reason in order to propel that story forward. If you look at what the student has done here, for example, look at the dialogue that takes place. "I promise you, my angel," he softly uttered, "I'll get you a TV." Together they gingerly sauntered to civilization and a little street where shops were located. So again, simply in that, it's simply a statement. It paves the way for what they're going to do. The other good thing about that little sentence that the student has written, notice the word gingerly and sauntered. They're good words to express what's going on there. The word civilization, it may seem a bit strong, but it's still reasonably good. The reason it's reasonably good is because it now gives us an indication that these two characters live quite a way away from any civilization itself. And that's also opened in the opening of that paragraph. So it's a continuation of the same idea. So the student has done that reasonably well. So with the opening of the snow there, with the father working as a lumberjack, and then going into the civilization or the small township, again gives that sense of isolation that these two characters live in. So the student has done that well all the way through. So again, having a look at the final paragraph of this particular piece, and this is where perhaps it does become a little weak. Now, the student ends this piece by saying something along the following lines. Henry and Rose left the shop with much more to think about. With the TV on his back, Henry ran with Rose to their isolated hut, hoping for a better life. After installation was complete, for hours on end, they observed the TV. Well, okay, now, fair enough, but then they exchanged laughter and reminisced of a better life Henry once had. Now, as I said, so the student has tried to get the TV now as the central part of the story, and that is necessary because, as you can see from the illustration, it is about the television as well. So the student has done that, but it doesn't really connect along those lines. It seems as if the ending has been rather forced. Nevertheless, the faults in this particular piece are nevertheless fairly obvious, but the writing itself compensates for a great deal of what is good in this particular piece of writing, and that's what's important. So again, if we think about the language that is being used, it is fairly appropriate all the way through. You will notice that the sentences have been well constructed all the way through. There are, as you can see, a number of errors, not too many. A number of spelling errors do occur. For example, Reminisced is spelt incorrectly. Paid is spelt incorrectly. The student has put admissed instead of missed. And paid, P-A-Y-E-D, is the wrong paid. It needed to be P-A-I-D. But apart from those mechanical errors that do occur throughout the writing process, the overall piece has done exactly what the illustration was asked of the student to do. So, to reiterate, the student has incorporated the television into this particular piece. He's also incorporated the father and the daughter into the piece as well. The sense of isolation has been created reasonably well throughout this particular piece of writing. Therefore, the narrative itself meets many of the requirements that the examiners would be looking for. And they're the sort of things that you should be trying to do yourself in your own writing. So wherever you can, you say to yourself, right, my story will need a beginning, a middle, and an end. You've got to make sure that the three of those connect logically. If they don't, then you're going to have what we call a fragmented piece of writing. Fragmented writing is never logical, and therefore it creates problems. So be careful when it comes to your own structuring. You can use this as a reasonable template of a good piece of structured writing. So until we meet next time, thank you.